Okay, I'll start this. Good morning, everybody. This is Mark, and I am happy to host Kjeld Jensen on our Ask the Expert this week. Kjeld is a famous speaker and has done many sessions with IACCM, and we're always happy to have him back. Kjeld, it's up to you.
Thank you so much, Mark, and thank you for the invite. The topic that I am happy to introduce today is my absolutely brand new book, Honest Negotiation, and the content, obviously. It's a book that was globally released just as late as yesterday, really, so it is available in most part of the world right now. As I just said, it is launching right now in the US and UK and English-speaking part of the world, and it is coming out in other languages throughout the summer and August and September. And the reason that I felt inclined to do yet another book on negotiation is really that I feel that there is obviously a need, but also that I had something else that I wanted to share with the world based on a lot of client work and based on a lot of research regarding this book. So basically my introduction will be the content of the book, what I feel was important for me to share with the world in the book. And obviously, as Mark just pointed out, if there's any questions whatsoever during this live session, please come forward and ask whatever you feel might be relevant. Just a very, very brief background about myself. I don't want to bore anyone. I'm a dad, and that requires a lot of negotiation, obviously, as everybody who is a parent knows. So that's where I get some of my negotiation practices. My own background, very briefly, is I'm originally from the IT business. I grew up the ranks in marketing and in sales in Xerox and IBM, Toshiba. And I ended my career in the IT business as a chief executive officer as a public company in Stockholm in Sweden. In the late 90s, I discovered that I was basically unconsciously incompetent regarding negotiation. That basically is a very nice position because you don't know that you can't do it. So you actually feel happy. And I invited my partner in crime in the consultancy I'm running today on board in those days in the company to help out with negotiation. And in less than 2 hours, he actually showed to me that there was so much room and so much potential in relationship between parties that I was actually, to be quite honest, shocked. And within a very short time, as I just said, I changed my career. I left the IT business and moved into consulting to help people, companies, corporations, and governments. And that's basically what we're doing today. I am assisting companies and governments in negotiation. So that's pre-work before we actually go into negotiations, setting up the team, preparing variables, look at potentials. We participate in actual negotiation with our clients or on behalf of our clients. And we do what we call post-evaluation. That means we sit down and look at how negotiation could actually be improved or even improved for both parties. So is there existing contract? Is there any way that we can even do that better? Besides that, I am an associate professor at the Thunderbird School of Global Management in the US. I am an associate professor at Aalborg University in Denmark and Baltic Management Institute in Lithuania. And I'm previously the chairman of the Center for Negotiation at Copenhagen Business School. I'm an author of 24 books that is published in 38 countries in a number of languages. I'm the chairman of the consultancy called Center for Negotiation. And then I am writing on a regular basis for Forbes magazine on negotiation, behavioral economics, and trust. And in 2016, I was very honored, surprised, and happy to get awarded to be among the top 100 thought leaders in trust worldwide. That was an award I got from an organization called Trust Across the World, Trust Across America, based in the US. And that's an award they nominate to 100 people every year. They feel they're doing an extraordinary work regarding trust. I'm getting back to that in a second. My client Blue Calling in Denmark is a public company that are doing waste management and sewage support and power support for the local government. And some of you might have been following the Ask the Expert call we have a while ago where the CEO of that company, Mr. Per Holm, participated with me as well, because we were talking about the award they got from the Organization of Public Procurement Officers in Denmark. And they actually got the award of the best tender negotiation for 2017. And I was very happy on their behalf that they got the award because they have chosen to use the philosophy that we have created on negoeconomics and smartnership. And that's two of the things I will be sharing with you through this Ask the Expert call. And Blue Calling actually created this drawing up here that basically showed two trenches, obviously, and that's soldiers on both trenches. And the reason I'm sharing this is this reminds me and obviously Blue calling a lot about the traditional tender, traditional negotiation, where you basically have two parties that are pointing the rifles towards each other. And that is considered what I would consider zero-sum negotiation. And zero-sum, obviously, as the majority of all of you knows, is where one side is winning at the expense of the other. So the success I'm creating is happening at the expense of the counterpart, and the success the counterpart is getting is happening at the expense of the other side. Now, why is it that I'm not too thrilled about that approach? And by the way, an approach that is often seen in tendering because you lack openness and you lack communication and exchange of information. The reason I dislike this method is because we simply just lose potential, the real potential that is out there between the parties. We just miss a potential up to 42%, which very often is actually not seen by the two parties. And I'm getting back to in detail where that is coming from. I just want to share a small cartoon here, Calvin and Hobbes, the American cartoon, because this often reminds me of an opening of what I would call a traditional negotiation. What you see here is Calvin and Hobbes trying to play baseball. And obviously the tiger is way higher than the little boy there, as you can see. So he'd throw the balls way too high and the boy can't reach it. So as you can see further down, they start discussing. So they are having a verbal argumentation. And that verbal argumentation, as you can see, moves into, becomes very physical. They goes into a real fight. They're fighting for a while, and then they're exhausted. Both of them are running out of energy. And then they sit down, as you can see at the very right button there, and start talking about, this is kind of stupid. Why don't we actually try and work together? Why don't we exchange information? Why don't we get information about the counterpart's needs and limitations and all of that? And then they create what I call necroeconomics, and that is really the staircase, because they create the staircase figuring out that, hey, if we have a staircase and a little boy can stand up that, then he got the right height to actually hit the ball. Now, my question always to my clients when I'm using this small cartoon is, why didn't they figure that out right from the beginning? Why isn't the staircase right up there at the beginning, so they could have saved all that wasted energy, wasted fighting, wasted arguing, instead of just figuring out what is the right solution? And obviously the answer is very often they're lacking rules of the game. You know, they haven't actually negotiated on how to negotiate. They haven't talked about what is your limitation, what is your benefit, what is your aim, what is your targets, what is your cost, all of that before they actually start negotiating. And they haven't actually agreed either on how they want to negotiate. Now, one of my big questions, and a question I was raising at the IACCM European Conference in Dublin earlier in May this year, was actually, why are we not improving our contract negotiations? And the reason I'm asking this is my mission in life is basically trying to improve the relationship between two or more parties. It's basically trying to utilize the unutilized potential between parties and finding that value. Now, one of my questions that I'm coming up with in a second is, how many of you have actually read Getting to Yes? The very famous and great book, by the way, that was written by two Harvard professors back in 1983. And let me just repeat that, 1983. Think about that. That's actually a lot of years ago. And that actually reminds me, my God, I'm getting old, by the way. But the reason I'm asking this question is, this is still considered one of the Bibles within negotiation. And very often when I'm stepping into new clients, or I'm opening a workshop or whatever, I'm asking how many of you have been reading that. And you know what? The majority of the audience actually raising their hand. And the same thing happened in Dublin. When I was asking the question, how many of people reading this book? The majority of, I think there was about 250 people in the room, raised their hand and says, yes, I read the book. My next question was, how many of you are using the theories in the book? And you know what? I think out of 250 people, I might have 20 or 30 people who raised their hand, and that's very typical. So my question is really, why is it that we are still buying that book, because it's still a #1 selling book? And again, I have to repeat, it was a great book in 1983, but it seems that the theory in this book is not really catching on. It seems that even though everybody likes the book, everybody appreciates the book, and the majority of negotiators in the world have been reading it, they're not using the content. And I am talking about this because I actually wrote and published my first book back in Denmark in 1998. And I reread that book about a year ago, and I have to be quite honest and say I didn't like it. I actually honestly disliked that book a lot when I reread it just about a year ago. And the reason I didn't like it is because I realized that negotiation have moved so much since 1998 till 2016. So the topic that I was sharing in my first book ever on negotiation is really not valid in 2016. Time has changed, new communication methods was coming up, the mentality in so many businesses has changed, the approach to how we handle negotiation has changed. So the readings from the 19s are not working today. And it actually kind of made me both sad and happy, because I realized that negotiation is really a moving thing. So what we did in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s are not something that is actually compatible with the world we're in today. So one of my questions is still, why are we still negotiating the same way we were doing in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s? Because we haven't really moved a lot. Now, one of the things I saw at the Dublin conference was a workshop on new technology. And there's a company several companies actually, that are trying to promote that we should negotiate by technology. And I truly believe that we are going in that direction. But it's not really changing anything, because if we don't change our mindset what our negotiation might be, technology is not going to change that for us. Obviously, that's just going to be an extended tool on how we actually negotiate. So what I would love you to actually answer right now, and I would love you to participate in this question, is how many of you have actually been reading Getting to Yes? And I'm curious about that, since that is really funny to see the actual response on that, how many who has been reading and perhaps even been using the tools and techniques from this great book then. Now, another thing we talked about at the Dublin conference in Ireland was actually a study conducted by World Economic Forum. And what World Economic Forum is saying is that negotiation is the fifth most important work skill, and it will actually continue on the list until 2020. Even though the World Economic Forum claims that negotiation will move down to place number 9 on a top 10, it will still remain on a top 10 most important work skill. Now, when I share this knowledge with a lot of my audience around the world, they actually get very surprised and puzzled, because if you actually look at whether negotiation as a work skill should be on a top 5 or on a top 10, if you look at the impact and the awareness it has as a tool, it's actually interesting to see that it doesn't really get the same level of attention in corporation that it perhaps should have, considering that World Economic Forum claims it's on a top 5 and will remain on a top 10. I don't really know whether I should say I agree or disagree regarding World Economic Forum's listing, because I consider negotiation to be way more than just a skill. I actually consider negotiation to be a strategy. And very often I'm asking clients, when I'm stepping into new clients, have you got a negotiation strategy? And then sometimes I find that they become absolutely quiet, and some of them are just sitting there looking out the window and making funny noises, because a certain amount of corporations and organizations and governments out there haven't actually got an efficient negotiation strategy. And then I'm usually asking them, have you got a communication strategy? And they acknowledge that. And then I ask, have you got a procurement strategy? They acknowledge that. And then I'm saying, have you got an HR strategy? And they acknowledge that. And I'm saying, have you got a research and development strategy? And they acknowledge that. Obviously, they have a lot of all these strategies, but they haven't really got a negotiation strategy. So one of the things I'm focusing on during this Ask the Expert interview is really what is a strategy? And obviously I can't step in there telling anybody what the right strategy is. I can just offer the opportunity of thinking about creating a strategy and different tools to build a strategy in your negotiation. Now, one of the other things that in my world is kind of important when we look at it is really how we move ourselves, as I mentioned earlier. And very often we start being unconsciously incompetent, and as I was back in the 90s, you don't know that you can't do it. Then the sad thing happens, you move into become consciously incompetent. That means you suddenly realize that, hey, I actually have an area I felt I was good at, but I'm really not that good at it. Then you move down to consciously competent. That means you can do it, but you have to be very focused on it. And then finally, if you reach an expert level, if that exists at all, well, then you actually move into becoming unconsciously competent. I think I can best relate to this and describe to everybody by a picture. And imagine yourself that you're getting into your car at home in the morning and you're ready to drive off to work. And just when you arrive at the parking lot in front of your office building, you might be sitting in your car thinking, how the heck did I actually get here today? just try and ask yourself that question. Have you actually ever experienced that? And the reason we experience that is obviously because we are unconsciously competent in the art of driving. We don't have to think about it because it's just something that we can do automatically. It's so much built into our DNA because we have done it so many times. We've been practicing, we've been training, so we can just do it. Now, I do find some clients who are unconsciously incompetent, but I do find clients that are consciously incompetent as well. But unfortunately, they're more unconsciously incompetent than consciously incompetent. And what I find we can help, and especially by reading books and being aware of the topic, and I'm not just talking about my books, but all the outstanding great books that are out there on negotiation as well. What I really need the whole world to be is consciously competent and aware of the importance and where we're moving in relationship and how we can improve how we work together. So my question is really, if you're consciously competent right now, your challenge is actually moving on to become unconsciously competent. And the way you can do that is actually sharing information with other people and start negotiating on how to negotiate. That means bring it up as a topic at a leadership level, because it's really a leadership tool and a strategy for the company, as I mentioned earlier. Now, let me just go through very quickly, and this is a small promotional part, but what is the topic? And I'll relate that to actually facts in a second. But what is actually the content of my brand new book, Honest Negotiation? Well, one of the things that we're focusing on is actually why we negotiate. And that may sound like a stupid question, especially in a book about negotiation, but I'm actually adding it because some people don't realize they do negotiate. And I claim that the average person out there is having between 8,000 to 10,000 negotiations per year. And if you divide that by 365 days, that's actually a lot. But I bring proof and fact to the table how and why we are negotiating this often. The next item I'm talking about is a little bit provoking, but that's what I call nego porn. And nego porn is really where we step into negotiation and we negotiate just to win. And this is sometimes what could be considered combative mode. So that really means that some people step into a negotiation, they want to win. And by the way, there's nothing wrong by winning. That's why we negotiate, to get a result that is better tomorrow than what we had yesterday. But they step into a negotiation and try to win at the expense of the counterpart. And in true nego porn, which is a negative thing, they try to win at the expense of the counterpart, and they want to make sure at the same time that the counterpart loses. So they're only really happy when they're sure they're winning at the expense of the counterpart and the counterpart lost. I'm working right now with the procurement director at a huge grocery store chain in the world. I'm not going to mention any names, but their procurement director has this phrase, and let me just share that phrase with you. He's saying, and this is a true story, we are only successful negotiating with our suppliers if they are not making any money. Let me repeat that. We are only truly successful negotiating with our suppliers if they're not making any money. Now, this huge chain is so powerful in some markets that they're very dominant. So I'm actually confronting this guy and say, you know what, some of your suppliers are so dependent on you that if they don't make any money, they're probably going to go bankrupt. And you know what he responds to me is then, we don't care, we're going to find another one. Now, this is really what I call nego porn. We are just abusing values, we are abusing what I call ethics and moral, and we're just doing whatever we can to win at the expense of the counterpart. Let me just repeat once again, I have nothing against winning. I think it's great to win. That's why we are in negotiation. I just know that in a partnership world, we can actually win, but not at the expense of the counterpart. We can actually make the counterpart win as well. I just want to throw in another phrase from the book, and that is something that goes like this. Imagine you step into a negotiation. After you did all the introduction, and happy to see you know of that, then you're actually raising this question to the counterpart. I'm here today to help you reduce your risk, reduce your liabilities, and improve your profit. Would you have an interest in me helping you do that? Could you imagine that you actually started a negotiation by doing that? I can promise you that the counterpart will look very confused, and then the majority of them will say, well, yes, that will be great. And then the next step you have to go into is actually looking at your counterpart and say, and by the way, I expect you to be here to help me reducing my cost, reducing my liabilities, and improving my profit. Are you willing to do that? Now, once again, hopefully you get an acknowledgement of that. And then the third level is obviously, and you and I have to agree that we are here together today to increase our mutual profit, reduce our mutual risk, and reduce our liabilities. That's the reason we're sitting here. So please, ladies and gentlemen, translate the word negotiation with collaboration, because that's how it could be perceived, regardless whether we are in a consumer market, whether we are just working with some simplicity product, very simple product, or whatever we are doing. Another topic I am covering in honest negotiation is the concept of trust currency. And I'm getting back to in a second what trust currency is all about, but just very briefly, trust currency is obviously the combination, the merger between trust and money. And the reason I'm talking about it is because I felt that trust has been dropping in the Western world. And I'm going to talk about that in a second as well. Another topic in the book and content is negotiation as zero-sum or partnership. In between zero-sum and partnership, we do have partnership as well, but that is really part of the strategy talk. How do we choose an approach into negotiation? When do we choose zero-sum? When do we choose partnership? Or when do we choose partnership? Then we're talking about how we negotiate, not why we negotiate, but how we negotiate. We've been looking into 3,500 different negotiators, and we have tried to analyze the typical approach into negotiation. That means how they prepare themselves, how they conduct negotiation, what they're successful on doing, and what they're less successful on doing. And then we have 10 important points of advice. I know that simplifies everything, but I've just been trying in one chapter to say, well, if you don't read anything else in the book and you just want some easy shortcut approach in to become more successful, then at least read these 10 important points of advice regarding negotiation. Then we have a topic on stress, emotions, and personal chemistry. And I would have to say that even in 2017, the greatest enemy of the modern negotiator is stress, emotions, and personal chemistry. Just ask yourself a question. How many of you have actually been sitting in a negotiation and feel stressed, annoyed, irritated, angry about the counterpart? I'm pretty sure that is everyone. And that means that negotiation is an emotional process as well. That means that people get emotional inclined or get an emotional reaction to negotiation. So we have to understand the emotional intelligence part about negotiation as well. Then I have a chapter that is actually sharing what we talked about in the reason Ask the Expert, the winner of Denmark's best negotiation. And that happened back in February. So I'm talking about the company Blue Culling, how they actually managed to get this award, why they got the award, and why it was that the organization of public procurement officers in Denmark felt that negoeconomics and partnership was worthwhile awarding a prize. We're also talking about four big ideas that could change the world, possibly. And I'm getting back to those ideas in a second as well, because they are really, really important. And then we're going to talk about behavioral economics. And behavioral economics, a lot of you have probably stumbled upon that already. It is a scientific area that is growing a lot in the last 10, 15 years. And there's a guru out there who is the Mr. Behavioral Economics in the world, an American professor by the name of Daniel Kahneman. And if you don't know him already, I would strongly recommend that you look into his work. He actually got the Nobel Prize in Economics a couple of years ago, which is kind of outstanding. Not only getting that, I think that's kind of outstanding by itself, but he got awarded as the first non-economical person ever in the history of the Nobel Prize. So he's actually coming from psychology, but got the Nobel Prize in economics. And the reason that he got it is very simply because he found that people are irrational. So that means that we base our decisions on emotions, and later on we find the facts that prove that our emotional decision was right. That is basically behavioral economics very, very shortly. So you can say the book is about strategy, zero-sum, partnership, partnership. It's about trust currency. Trust is declining. It's about negoeconomics, creating additional value, and it's about rules of the game. That means negotiate on how to negotiate. Now, the four big ideas that hopefully are going to change the world, and I'm sharing with everybody at every conference and every client I am at every single day around the world, is these four big ideas up here. And I know I've been talking about them before. I know some of you have seen it before, but I keep repeating it because it is truly something that is close to my heart, and know it is utterly important. And I do see that negotiators who fulfill these four items are way more successful than those who don't. We've been studying this not only in laboratory but in real life negotiations, and we've done that with more than 5,000 people and more than 3,000 negotiations, and we've clearly seen that those who have picked a strategy, as I mentioned already, are way more successful. Now, I have 3 suggestions to strategy choices, and that could be, as I mentioned already, zero-sum, partnership, or partnership. Now, zero-sum, I guess everybody knows that. As I just said, we win at the expense of the counterpart. Partnership, on the other hand, is probably a very misunderstood word, because I often see that when I'm asking a company, what's your official strategy, some of them might be say partnership. And when I then look into details, I actually see that what they're really doing is a long-term zero-sum with their counterpart. And that is obviously not real zero-sum. A real partnership is not a long-term zero-sum. A real partnership is where we have focused on variables, we have created some kind of trust, and we have created some kind of openness. And we may even focus on the concept I call necroeconomics that I'm getting back to in a very short time. Sorry, but the parties here might still be lacking rules of the game. That means how to negotiate and actually how to voice creating trust and perhaps even lack of trust. The last of the 3 I'm going to share with you right now is the concept of smartnership. And smartnership is really where we have created rules of the game. We have discussed on how to negotiate. We have established trust. We have talked about necroeconomics. We have created a list of variables. We have all of this in place. So if we look at what we know, how we can generate success, financially success in a negotiation, we know that yes, you could be successful in zero-sum. I can mention several companies throughout the world who are very successful conducting pure zero-sum. I do believe, however, they could become even more successful if they chose partnership. So that means that they are working more closely together. And I know for a fact that if companies, organizations, or government chose partnership as a general rule, they could become extremely successful. About 6 or 7 years ago, I got a strong feeling one day. I got a gut feeling that trust was dropping in the Western world. And the feeling was so strong, so I felt that I should write a book about the topic. But you know, you can't write a book just about a very subjective issue like a gut feeling. So I teamed up with a huge international organization that went out internationally and did a study among 20,000 people in 15 different countries. And unfortunately, they came back and said, Mr. Jensen, you're absolutely right. Your gut feeling was true. Trust has dropped in the Western world. Actually, they measured it and found that trust in the Western world has dropped more than 55% in the last 20 years. Now, that is not really a great idea, or it's not really great news, because listen to what I'm sharing with you guys now. If we have a low level of trust in any kind of relationship, our transactional cost will increase and our profit will go down. On the other hand, if we have a high level of trust, our transactional cost will go down and our profit will increase. Now, a lot of studies, and not only my studies, but other studies have shown that trust is at a lower level now than ever before. The graph I'm showing on the screen right now is by an American professor named Professor Yankulovich, who wrote a book called Profit per Dollar. And he actually measured exactly the same as we did, that trust is at the lowest level ever since trust started to be recorded in the 50s. This is an issue because trust is such an important part of negotiation, especially in partnership and partnership. If you're in zero-sum, really not important. You can conduct zero-sum without having a lot of trust, but in partnership or partnership, we need trust. So trust is a separate topic in the book that we discuss a lot, how to generate trust, how to read trust, and how to actually recreate trust. Now, I'm using, I very often use the example, as you might be able to see, I don't know whether the video is actually playing, but called the Keystone, because the Romans were actually kind of amazing. Thousands of years ago, they had these skills in architecture of actually creating the arch. And a lot of them are standing today. Often I'm thinking about how many buildings that was built in 2017 will still be standing here 2,000 years ago. And what the Roman engineer figured out then, that there was this thing called the Keystone. And if you remove that middle stone in an arch, the whole thing would collapse. Think about trust the exact same way. I have another short question to all of you out there, and I'm just curious, do you actually believe that trust is at a lower level today than 20 years ago? And don't just believe what I'm saying, just listen to your own gut feeling, think about your partners, think about who you are negotiating with, think about a counterpart, think about the world as a whole. Do you think that trust is actually a lower level today than it was 20 years ago? Now, the other thing I want to share with you today is another part of the book, obviously, which is rules of the game. And think about it this way. Negotiation could be perceived as different as one party stepping into a negotiation and think it's like playing chess, and the other party stepping into negotiation and think we're playing tennis. That's going to be a very, very, very interesting result, isn't it? Because they're not playing the same game. One side is sitting there with the racket trying to play tennis, and the other one are moving the pieces on the chessboard around. That's going to be difficult. That is how different a negotiation could be perceived, because we have never agreed worldwide what is negotiation. So what I always recommend, and discussing this in the book as well, is actually we need to sit down and talk about how to negotiate before we start negotiating. And that could actually take a bit of time, but we save a lot of time by having agreed already before we start negotiating on how to negotiate. So that's kind of an important thing. And part of discussing how to negotiate obviously is listing the variables, what is negotiable, verbalizing how do you deal with trust and openness, how we're going to share information, our cost and benefit, who's going to open up the first, how do we do the agenda, who's leading this, and blah, 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 so on and so forth. Now, the other thing I want to share with you right now is the concept of necroeconomics. And this is kind of getting a bit old study that I've been sharing with a lot of you guys probably already. And what we have found in this huge study, looking at more than 35,000 negotiations, is that if we have a negotiation, like you can see in the pie chart right here, that could have a value of, let's just say, 100 million. We know that in average, the buying side is only leaving the negotiation table with about 19% of all the value. So in this case, that would only be 19 million. The selling side, on the other hand, is leaving this negotiation with 39% of all the value. So in this case, that will be 39 million. And you know what's really funny? Both of these parties might be very happy. They might be outstandingly happy and excited about the outcome they got. But they really don't know what the real value might be, and they actually don't know how much they got, how much share they got of this pie chart. Because what is left on the table after these two parties have agreed and signed the contract is up to 42% unutilized potential. And that is what I call necroeconomics. Now, it's a little bit complicated describing in here because I can't draw anything on the screen, but if I could advise you to visit my webpage, as you can read down at the bottom of the screen, there's an animation video in there that in less than 2 minutes describing in detail what is necroeconomics all about and how can we utilize it. Now, please remember that when you look at the animation is just giving one example on financial terms in terms of payment. And that is basically just describing how can we utilize the difference in cost of capital. That means what is the cost of capital to one side versus what is the cost of capital to the other side in a negotiation. But we actually have necroeconomics potential in so many areas. And let me just very quickly translate necroeconomics. It's all about the difference of values and cost. So if you have a lower cost in doing something compared to my cost, you should obviously do it, whatever it is. It could be transportation or warehousing or logistics or whatever. And obviously, if I have a cost to a certain degree that is lower than your profit and you're willing to compensate my cost, obviously we should go ahead doing that as well. So that's as simple as I can explain necroeconomics, and it's really not rocket science. I have another question for you guys out there, and that is really, do you believe there is an unutilized potential in negotiations? Do you actually believe there is something that could be considered necroeconomics? I'm not saying that you actually yourself leave a negotiation with a potential, because we don't believe that would happen, but do you think it is possible that we actually agree something with a counterpart and we almost always leave that negotiation with an unutilized potential that could be financially capitalized? Now, let me just give you an illustration to continue to talk about added value, because the top of this illustration you see here is what I call the traditional negotiation space. And that is sometimes, especially in serious sum, what negotiator feels is the total room for negotiation. So that actually means that the traditional room for negotiation is the difference between what the buyer want to pay as a maximum, and that could be controlled by their budget or what we call their next best alternative, the NBA. And in this case, that is 150,000. On the other side of the table, we have the sales rep sitting, and he has a limit of 120. That is the lowest price he can go down to. So obviously the traditional negotiation space is 30. And in a serious sum, obviously, that is often the space we have to negotiate on. But if you look below, we have what I call the real negotiation space, because we actually add the concept of necroeconomics. And three things will happen if we add necroeconomics into a negotiation. One thing that will happen, obviously, if we can utilize up to 42% more value, is that the space will increase. And if the space between the two parties will increase, it will be easier to reach a result in this negotiation. And the third thing that will happen in this negotiation is actually I can win, but not at the expense of the counterpart, and the counterpart can win, but not at the expense of me. So that means we can actually get more out of this negotiation than we would in zero sum. When I'm sitting with the supplier side, I'm often asking them, what would you rather give away to the buyer? Would you rather give them a discount or reduction in price, or would you rather give away necroeconomics? And then I'm truly, truly hoping that they're giving me the right answer. Because if they give me the right answer, they have been paying attention. Obviously, I've been good enough of explaining what my aim is here in life. And the right answer, obviously, and I hope all of you out there is getting that right answer immediately as well, is that it's way better giving away necroeconomics because it doesn't cost us anything. Necroeconomics is free money that has been created, and it's just lying there in between you and me. Now, I'm not obviously advising anybody to give it away, because you should negotiate for your piece of the pie and your piece of that necroeconomic sum created. But basically, price to me is not something that should be negotiated up there and very early on. Price is a variable, just like every other variable. It's just like logistics, transportation, warehouse, education, terms of payment, you name it. It's just one of those variables. And price may not even be that important. It could actually just be one that is coming up later on in the negotiation, but it shouldn't be that almost religious thing that we have to discuss, because often we can create way more value in necroeconomics. So think about that in your negotiation as well. Let me just wrap this up with the 4 big ideas by these small drawings here of the girl that looks very unhappy, because what I want to share with everybody is that our prosperity is no longer prosperity if it's pinned down to other people's pain. So what I'm really saying is that I don't think it is real success if we're sitting in a world where you win at the expense of other people. And I'm not saying that just because I feel that I should be socially responsible. I'm actually saying it because I know that we can actually make way more money if we actually include other people and think about becoming successful, but not at the expense of others. I'm just repeating this slide. Those of you that are following the last Ask the Expert one, where we talked about Blue Culling, who won this this award of being the best tender negotiation in Denmark, saw the slide as well. I'm just sharing it because this is actually a comment from the Organization of Public Procurement Officers in Denmark as part of the prize. And what they're saying is Blue Culling, the company, has been thinking outside the box and approached tendering and negotiation in a new way. They have included necroeconomics and partnership that is optimizing the agreement for both parties and creates a true win-win deal. It's clever, it's smart, it's collaboration, and it's the right way in a negotiation process. Now, I am very surprised and happy actually that an organization, as I said, like the Organization for Public Procurement Officers, is actually the one that is recognizing this, because very often that is the kind of organization that would be more or less stuck in pure tender and pure zero sum. And by the way, tendering is often zero sum. Let's just assume for a second, ladies and gentlemen, that you and I are sitting watching two parties negotiating. And our role right now is just seeing how many of them is actually going to be successful. This is a study we've done with thousands of negotiators, and we're giving them a simple task. They actually had to agree on a very, very simple negotiation, as you can see right here. We have two parties that are negotiating about a simple thing as a painting. And we're very lucky because we know that the seller want to sell this painting and we know the buyer want to buy it. So that's one variable that has been agreed on already. The other variable, and the only other variable we have, is price of this painting. And we know the two parties involved in this negotiation don't actually know that, but the sales rep has a limit of 110,000 and the buyer has a maximum of 123. So you and I know that these two parties should be able to reach an agreement, right? Because they have 13,000 in between themselves, but the two parties can't see that. So my question to all of you right now, how many do you think in percentage, and we've been running this study for thousands and thousands of negotiations, how many of those two parties do you actually think is going to reach an agreement? Now, let me share the result with you, and some of you might be thinking, well, that's pretty good, isn't it? 90% of all of these conducting this simple negotiation is successful. And then I have to say, no, I think it's terrible, because we still have 10% who actually messes this one up. And this is a very, very simple negotiation, isn't it? They only have to agree on finding a price in between 123 and 110, and still 10% is actually messing this one up. Let me just share a negotiation with you that is way more complicated and way more probably like your life, okay? So it could be robots or machinery or technology or whatever you are negotiating. And let's just say there's a number of variables, as you can see to the right. We might have price, term of payment, delivery time, cost of production, availability, installation, maintenance, blah, 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 so on and so forth. There might be a lot. But besides all of those variables that you and I know, because we're watching the two parties negotiate, we know that they can agree on all these variables. And what we also know is that these are the cost and the budget we have available. So we know that the sales rep has a limit of 11 million, and we know that the purchaser can maximum pay 12.8. Once again, you and I can see that the two parties can actually reach an agreement because we have 1.8 million in room for negotiation in a traditional room for negotiation, and we also know they could agree on all the other variables. So my question is now, in percentage, how many of these negotiations do you think is actually going to be successful? Now, the interesting number here is 75%. And again, I meet a lot of people who come to me and say, well, that's wonderful, isn't it? And once again, I usually say, no, that's actually very, very terrible, because we have 25% who messes up. 25% who actually return to their organization and claims it was impossible to reach a deal. But it is not. It is actually possible. They just can't find the key. Now, what is even more terrible in this case is that the 75% who reach an agreement are very often losing the potential of economics. So they have just found a deal within a traditional room for negotiation. So we may talk about the 75% is actually successful reaching a deal, but again, the majority of them are actually not really utilizing their potential and may get a deal that is working, but they don't get the real value back home. One of the tools that we are sharing in the book, and I've been sharing at several conferences as well, is what we call the SAM model, the Strategy Assessment Matrix. And this one is helping us identifying what strategy we should use. And if you look at the vertical line shows how important you are to your counterpart. So that's basically the counterpart sitting, looking at you and viewing how important you are to them. The horizontal line down here is showing how important the counterpart might be to you. So obviously, if the counterpart is very important to you, you go way more towards right. If they are less important to you, go way more towards the left. And the same thing goes with the vertical line. The more important you are to the counterpart, the more you go up towards the top, and the less important they are, the more you go down to the bottom. Now, if you are in a zero-sum game, you will be in here, low impact, low risk. That means that the counterpart is not really important to you, and you're not really important to the counterpart. This is zero-sum, and this is a conscious, hopefully, choice of zero-sum. On the other hand, if you're up here in the top right quadrant where you are equally important to each other, we are in high impact and high risk. What strategy approach do you think you should choose? Hopefully you're saying partnership, because that is the only strategy choice that you can pick up there. It's not the only choice that is being picked, because people might even pick zero-sum up there, but the right answer is partnership. Everything else, and I don't want to offend anybody else, but any other choice of strategy up here in high impact, high risk is utterly stupidity. I can't put it in any other possible way. So we really have to define what kind of negotiation are we getting into. And let me share this with all of you. I don't believe we're in a world where everything should be partnership. Absolutely not. There will be negotiations that gain benefit from being in zero-sum, and there are definite negotiations that gain benefit from being in partnership. So you have to pick and choose what negotiations that should be conducted in a partnership strategy, which one in a partnership strategy, and which one in a zero-sum strategy. We're working on a number right now, and we're not completely done with research, so please don't take it too seriously at this point, but the number so far is about 40-60%. That means that we believe about 40% of the world's commercial negotiation should remain in zero-sum for so many reasons, and about 60% could, with a great benefit, be moved or stay in partnership or partnership. Just back to the drawing that Blue Colling did, back to the two trenches and the soldiers pointing the rifle towards each other. What Blue Colling is claiming is that even though that you sign a contract, you're basically still pointing the rifles towards each other. So you can see the trench just become round instead of just opposing each other. But you're really still not having openness, you're not trusting each other, you're not working closely together. Now, if you are moving from a traditional zero-sum into a partnership thing, you will point the rifles outwards because you'll actually be working together, trying to identify, utilize, and find mutual benefit for both parties. So that basically means you're not basically aggressive towards each other, but trying to utilize value from the outside. Just to wrap up the presentation, why and how is economics generated? And obviously I am focusing a lot on that in the book as well. And it's basically just coming from basis of differences. That means the parties have different costs, needs, risk, expectations, and willingness to take risk. The parties have different needs or needs that are not competing in terms of time through economies of scale, or just very simply through all changes where costs are below profits. It's really, really that simple. And think about, as I just said earlier, think about actually starting off a negotiation by saying, I'm actually here today to help you lower your cost, decrease your liabilities, and improve your profit. Would you be interested in that? And that's a very typical approach that would help you get into partnership. And obviously, you have to figure out which of your counterparts would be able, willing, and open to conduct partnership. We have a phrase, I think that will work in English as well for my native country, Denmark, where we say you can drag the horse to water, but you can't force it to drink. And the same thing goes in negotiation. You know, you can drag the counterpart to the conference table, but you can't force them into partnership. It's simply not working. So if the counterpart don't understand it, don't have the willingness, and don't see the opportunity, well, then you can't do partnership. And please remember one thing that is important, and we are discussing in our research as well, is that a successful negotiation could actually be that the parties doesn't reach a deal. If you feel that you get a better outcome by not reaching a deal, then you actually become successful. I'm mentioning this because sometimes I meet negotiators who are getting desperate if they're not reaching a deal with a counterpart. And that may not be a complete disaster, because if reaching a deal is a disaster, well, then obviously it doesn't really work out. I just want to wrap up. Hopefully there might be some questions out there, because we've just been scratching the surface on the whole topic of the book. But we have actually created an online training program together with Arizona State University and Thunderbird School of Management, an online program on partnership negotiation. It is an estimated 90-hour program with 42 videos and interaction with the professors, and you can find that on partnershipnegotiation.com. And as I mentioned, you can watch the animation and videos more in depth on my website, kjeldjensen.com. Mark, I was just wondering, have you got any questions, or how are things going?
Hey, Kjeld, everything's going great. I do have a question from Sergey. He agrees that tenders are often zero-sum, but asks, how do you see the concept of smartnership being implemented in an environment where the competitive bidding is quite often the only legally allowed or prescribed procedure?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. Well, it really depends on where you are in the world, because if I'm talking about Europe, European Union, they have actually released or relaxed a bit on the tendering process, because they have allowed now what is called tendering with negotiation. So that's a choice you have. You can, as a public procurement officer in Europe, now choose either to go purely tendering with no dialogue with the supplier, or you can actually choose to go tender with negotiation. Now, obviously, if you go with the latter one, that opens up the possibility of utilizing partnership. If you are forced into a strict tender, and that could both be in Europe and other parts of the world, then Sergey is absolutely right, then you might be limited. The only excuse you might have, and some people would like not to call that negotiation, and I don't care what people call it, but you can actually have an informal discussion with the suppliers prior to the actual tender. So that means that the buyer and the seller could have an informal dialogue about what would the cost be, what would the benefit be, how can we utilize value, why shouldn't I ask this from you because your cost will just increase, and instead I should perhaps ask for this in the tender. So you can actually have a dialogue prior to the tender going out. Now that doesn't make the thing exclusive, obviously, because a lot of tender laws around the world require that whatever information you share with one provider should be shared with the other one as well. But as I meet with a lot of clients who are stuck in tendering, is that they just announce those rules to all the potential supplier and say, whatever idea that you bring up, I have to share that with your competitors as well. But if you want to participate in the game and you want to be more competitive, well, then it might be a great idea that you try to utilize variables that will generate macroeconomics, because that will still benefit you. So I hope that was a kind of an answer, but obviously you are, and Sergey, absolutely right, you are limited the second you are in a pure, strict competitive tendering game, because it is zero-sum.
Thanks. I got another one from Richard. Have you looked at the impact of individual incentives on the ability to avoid zero-sum engagements? Too often, procurement are measured on savings, which makes it too difficult to negotiate.
Yeah. Another wonderful question. Thank you, guys. Yes, we have. And let me share a short story from real life that is actually so scary. I was in a negotiation in Germany a while ago, and I was sitting with the procurement director for a company, and we were sitting negotiating with the supplier. And obviously, I knew my client's content and details, and I noticed that my client, the procurement director, could actually improve on terms of payment, the financial side, a lot, but he didn't. So I don't know whether he forgot about it or he chose not to, but when we're done with the meeting and the supplier had left the conference room, I looked to my client and asked the procurement director, the procurement director, why didn't we improve on terms of payment? And do you know what he responded to me? He said, no, I know I could have done that way better for the company, but you know what? I don't get a personal bonus out of that. That is actually a gentleman that is our financial department, and I really hate that guy. So to me, that was just a realization of the real world where we might be in a silo, what I call silo thinking. So we are basically just thinking about what is good for me or my department. So it's a wonderful question, because silo thinking in a corporation is an extreme limitation on utilizing the concept of partnership and macroeconomics. And that is why I'm often saying another thing. We have to negotiate as a higher level as possible, because as you all know, water run downwards. And that means if we can get to the executive level as high as possible, they will get this concept immediately, because they can see the benefit, and they will make the changes that is required in order to utilize macroeconomics. I've seen that in so many companies. It's happening at the middle management level. It's not really happening. They get the idea, they think it's wonderful, but as human beings, we do what we're measured on, right? I can't criticize anybody for not doing that. So we have to bring negotiation up at a top level. That is where all the time CSIS becomes really successful, because we have to change the rules on how people are rewarded in an organization. So Richard's question is really good, because that is a threat to utilizing partnership and macroeconomics.
Okay, thanks, Kel. The other question that I got from Robin, sorry. When will honest negotiation be available in a Kindle format?
It is actually coming out in a Kindle format. I can't promise when. I haven't asked my publisher. If you will send me an email, I will be happy to respond to that. It's just kjeld@kjeldjensen.com, and I'll figure out with the publisher. I guess it will be ready within a very short time. We're probably talking days or weeks even at the maximum. Then it will be available at different electronic format. Yeah.
All right, Kjeld, thank you for that. Right now, I don't have any other questions. So thank you for today. I greatly appreciate it.
That is wonderful. Thank you for having me.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye for now.